So continuing on with the discussions of two-dimensional arrays, just to remind you, when you use the name of the array, the 2D array followed by that length, that will give you the first number that you give it here, which is the number of rows. And then the second, the second way to get the number of columns, what you will need to do is access one of the rows. Like this, and then call the .length property on that. So essentially this one right here would then go to this row and then tell you how many columns there are, which is 1 and then 2, right? Moving on from that, well, from a two-dimensional array you can actually access and grab one of the rows. So int row 0 is equal to my 2d2 of 0. This will grab row 0 from the two-dimensional array. If we continue that, we can say that row 2 is then at index 1. Now, in the way that you can grab a row from a two-dimensional array, you cannot do the same thing for a two-dimensional array to get the number of columns. So there is no built-in syntax that allows you to grab a certain column, and that is because, again, if you think about it, right, a two-dimensional array in Java is a stack of one-dimensional array. So this right here is being pointed by an array. So for example, let's say that the array my2d2 is going to be, this is probably better served in a drawing document or something, so that's not going to work. Again, we can get the number of rows, or we can get a certain row because of the fact that a two-dimensional array in Java is just a stack of one-dimensional array. Or essentially, you have a 1D array of 1D arrays. And because of that, right, we cannot get a single column like this one right here or this one right there. So you can easily grab a row but not grab a column. So let's do some example problems. Let's reset my 2D to be a new array. 30 by 15, I don't know. And then why don't we write the loop to set all elements in row 0 to be -5. So for that we need to go from column 0, and then what we want to do is go all the way to the last column, which is going to be row 0.length, and then each time we want to increment the variable c. From there, what we want to do is, in order to write values to a two-dimensional array, what you need is to give it the row number followed by the column. Here our column is designated with, by the variable c, and there it is. C will continue incrementing starting at 0 to 1 to 3 all the way to the last possible length, which is actually going to be 14. So C is going to have the value 0 through 15, but then when it gets to 15 it breaks out of the loop. So that would be how you access row 0 of a two-dimensional array and set all the values to -5. What if we want to do the last row? For the last row, we have the same loop that accesses all of the possible columns, but instead of putting 0 here, what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's figure out how many rows it has, right? And we're not going to hard code it by putting a number. we're going to use the dot length property of a 2D array. And go from there. Did I misspell something? Dot length. C is less than my 2D. Oops. My 2D of my 2D dot length minus 1 dot length C++. C++. So right there is going to access the last possible row, because this line right here is going to give us the number 30. Minus 1 will give us the number 29. Because we're indexing from 0, you've got rows 0, 1, 2, 3 all the way to 29. So then from there, my 2D of my 2D dot length minus 1 is equal to -3. So we'll just say set all vals to -3. So that's a row, and then of course we need to give it a column. So there you have it, right? Writing and reading elements or positions in a two-dimensional array is no different than what you did for one-dimensional arrays, except this time, of course, you need to give two addresses. One, what row are you grabbing from, and then two, what column. So now how do we fill up the first column with the number 7? So here we know that I had to traverse every single column, but if you're going down a column, that means that your column stays the same, but you are changing rows. So for that, I'm going to do row starting at 0. Row is less than my 2D dot length, right? Because my 2D dot length gives you the number of rows for that two-dimensional array. Then row plus plus. From there, I believe I already used row somewhere. Yep, I used it right there. I'll just delete that because I'm lazy. So my 2D at the row given, but it's always going to be column 0 is equal to 7. And that's how you do it. Now, in the same way that you could use that link to access the last possible row, you could also do the same thing to grab, the last possible column. So if you want to fill up the last column with all 8s, then we're going to go for same for loop setup, because you're going from row 0 all the way to the last. Row plus plus. And then here, my 2D row, instead of hard coding a number like 0, we're gonna say that we are accessing one of the rows. It doesn't really matter which one, and then we're gonna call that length -1 equal to 8. So this will give us which row we want. This will give us which column we want, and that will give you the last column in that 2D array. So those are the most common things you will find in, when you're dealing with two-dimensional arrays. One, do you know how to properly declare them? Declarations. Do you know how to instantiate them, right? Actually create that object. Do you know how to use the dot length property to grab the number of rows versus the number of columns? Do you know how to do simple traversals? Can you visit every element in a given row? Can you visit every element in a given column? And then finally, the last one that you'll commonly see would be, can you visit every single position? And for that, you can just combine the loop that accesses all the rows and then accesses all the columns. So we're going to go visit every row, right? For int r is equal to 0, r is less than my 2d.length. If I can spell r++. So that will allow me to visit every single row. And then for the row that I have, for each row, I'm going to say that I'm going to visit every single column of that row. My 2d of r.length c++. So this right here will then allow me to go to that row and write every single element in that row. Right? So the outer loop says for each row, the inner loop says for each column. Now there's actually another type of for loop that we will review later. It's called the for each loop, an enhanced loop, and that will simplify your life. It's not required to know in AP Computer Science. You'll never be asked to write it. However, you will be asked to probably read it in many different areas of the exam. And that's the basics of two-dimensional arrays.